There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today. I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, your home for deer hunting news, stories, and strategies. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kenyon, and this is episode number 252. And today on the show, I'm joined by Josh Furter Hillyard and my father to discuss the history of our family deer camp and some of our favorite stories from along the way. All right, we are back in the log cabin with the wood-burning stove and the propane lights. And almost exactly 1 year ago, we were here, me and Furter, talking about deer camp. And that was a good chat, right, Josh?
That was a good chat.
It was a good chat, but it was an incomplete chat because it was just you and me. And we were missing a very important part of any deer camp. Do you know what that is, Furter?
I think I've got a pretty good idea.
Yeah, it's the senior citizen brigade. it's the senior member of the camp. We do have a senior member of the camp, one of the senior members of our camp. We don't have them all here today, but we do have special guest, first time appearance on the podcast, many time appearance in my life. David Kenyon, my dad. Welcome to the show, Dad.
Thanks, Mark. Glad to be here.
And I gotta say, this is interesting, right? Yeah. Haven't had the father-son dynamic on the show yet, so I just gotta tell you, you can't get too much into like proud dad mode like you do sometimes. try to stay.
What am I going to talk about?
Yeah, you gotta try to stay unbiased. Otherwise, people are gonna turn this off real quick.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure I can throw a few things in there that'll help.
Yeah. You can share the other side of things. But no, I'm really excited because so much of what makes this place special, where we're at right now, is the history. And that is something that I want to talk about today because last time when we talked deer camp, me and Furter were kind of just talking about the recent history, talking about our hunts up here just recently, what was going on. But there's so much about this place that's steeped in the past. And one of my favorite things growing up, and I don't know if you remember this, if this annoyed you at all. It probably annoyed some people. But I just remember every time we were driving up to camp, whoever I was sitting with in the back seat, sometimes it was Terry, sometimes it was maybe you or Uncle Steve or Uncle Bill or whoever it might be, I was always asking them to tell stories. Like, tell me about the first time you got a deer. Tell me about this one time up at camp. Or tell me about this year. What happened this time? I just loved all the stories of the old days. And I still love the stories of the old days. So I'm hoping you can share some of those stories of the old days. So is that something you're up for today?
Yeah, sure.
Well, good. We are sitting here, we're drinking cold beverages, we got the fire going. We just had my wife's famous venison chili, and Josh made some great deer heart. So we are borderline food coma.
I'm ready for bed.
Yeah, so hopefully we can stay awake for this one. because I think it's always fun to talk about this stuff. But I guess before we get into those good old stories, we should at least talk about what's happened here so far. It was kind of a quick trip up here to camp, kind of two-ish days, 2 quick days. And Dad, you and me, we have not seen a deer at all, right?
No. Nope.
So we don't have a whole lot to share. But Furts, you've been kind of the star of the show.
Yeah, I've seen 10 deer.
Yeah,
to your guys is 0.
Which is pretty good for up here.
Yeah.
Can you walk us through your
Yep.
hunts? What's happened so far?
Yeah, well, I got up here, a night before you guys. I got up Sunday night, and not in time to hunt, but my first hunt was Monday morning, and I'm trying to remember what all even happened that morning. I guess I saw 4 deer that morning. I saw like a little forkhorn, a spike, a button buck, and a doe. Throughout the morning, just kind of slow morning, even though seeing those deer is all kind of in a short time period where they came through. That was fun. I sat where Mark usually sits. I snaked his spot since he wasn't here yet.
Mm-hmm.
He couldn't say no, so I went
did.
and sat one of the food plots that he usually sits. So that was fun to sit somewhere where I hadn't sat yet.
And interestingly, the one time I let you hunt there, and then all the subsequent hunts, it's been dirt. I haven't seen a single deer.
Yeah.
So you found some way to really destroy that spot real quick.
I walked through the whole food plot. I didn't wash my clothes.
Took a dump in the middle of the field.
Exactly. Yeah.
You turned that into a gar hole real
ruin
quick.
it for you. Yep. No, I didn't do any of that. I snuck in there and snuck out. So that was a good first morning. We don't see a ton of deer up here, so seeing 4 in one sit is pretty good.
It's a good day.
2 antlered bucks in one sit is a good day.
It's worth pointing out that from the time I can remember coming hunting up here, so if my memory serves right, probably from the time I was like 6 or 7 is when I can start remembering hunts. You know that I was up here dead, right? I was up here at 6, 7, 8 years old.
No, you were up here much earlier than that.
Well, yeah, but that I can remember.
Well, I can't tell you what you can remember. I remember you being about
true.
3 years old at the bottom of the blind.
Yes. Okay. So I can remember though around like 7 or 8 years old because I remember 95. I was 7 at 95. I remember that was the year that GP killed his big one and Terry killed his big one.
Yep.
So I remember that year, and I remember the year before that, which was when Steve killed that nice 8-pointer. So maybe 6 years old is when I can remember those hunts. So from 6 all the way till like I was like 18 or 19. So let's call it that whole time period, 10, 12 years or whatever. I can remember seeing 1, 2, I think 2 antlered bucks in all those years of you and me hunting together. I think we only saw 2 or 3 antlered bucks in a 10 or 12 year period.
Yeah.
So
it doesn't totally shock me. I mean,
it was probably the 2 that you and I saw when you wanted to pull the gun away and shoot them yourself.
Well, that was one of the stories, and we'll tell that one. We'll get to that story soon. But yeah, I mean, so in general, we have not seen many. The last couple of years have been a little bit better. Mm-hmm. So this trip being indicative of that, even though you and me, Dad, didn't see anything, Josh, you saw a lot of bucks relative to.
But it wasn't always that way. So back when Grandpa and I and Uncle Steve and the rest of us came up here back in the late 60s and 70s and 80s, there were a lot of deer up here.
God, I thought those were the 30s and 40s.
So the area that we used to hunt in, a mile or so from where our camp is now, for what we call the oil road, at that time it was just a 2-track, and then the oil well companies came in. They widened the road. They did a lot of clear cutting. They put in the oil wells themselves. Suddenly, over the course of the next 2 or 3 years, we had all this undergrowth that grew up, and the deer. And then a number of people came in from the outside, from the drilling companies, and hunted. So now we had a lot of pressure than we never had before. And there were probably 5 years, maybe 10 years, where we were seeing lots of deer, and it was pretty cool. It was pretty fun. And then for whatever reason, in the late 90s and early 2000s, things slowed down again.
Yeah. So I want to get back to all that, but I guess we'll finish your story, Josh. And then I want to jump back to where you were just at there, Dad. Because, so in the past it had been better, and then there was a basically once I showed up, things started going down to the tube. Once I started coming, things really slowed down, and then maybe we've been on a little bit of an uptick the last couple of years. So Josh, you saw a couple little bucks.
Yeah, a couple little bucks that morning, Monday afternoon. You guys got here. What did I see? I saw 5 does Monday afternoon. And
I felt like it was going to be a really good night for me, too.
Yeah.
I was thinking it was going to be great, and then I start hearing all this blowing behind me. A couple hundred yards away, just
yeah,
for about 30 minutes.
It turned into a bit of a cluster.
Yeah.
They never got downwind of me. I don't think they smelled me, but I was sitting on the ground. This spot, it's not really conducive for a tree stand or a saddle. Sitting on a pipeline, trying to look down this pipeline. It's on the edge of this big hemlock stand.
Hemlocks are like an evergreen tree.
Right. So they got
very thick in there.
A lot of branches, a lot of low-hanging branches hanging over this pipeline. And so really the best bet is to sit in the ground there for visibility and shooting lanes, and then you can kind of see into the hemlocks too, because there's zero understory in there because there's no sunlight hitting the floor in there. Mm-hmm. So sitting on the ground. And that lead doe, she knew something was up. She never smelled me, but I think she knew something wasn't right. And she started blowing, and then one of the other does started blowing. They didn't really run off. They just kind of bounced off to about 40 yards and just looking at me and, bobbing their heads and stomping their feet and blowing. And that went on.
That is the worst.
It's the
when
worst.
I just sit there, and every time they make that noise, like a little part of my heart dies, and I think to myself, just leave. Just if you're so upset, just leave.
I was
Why
seriously
are you staying here blowing?
I was seriously ready to just stand up and like start waving my arms just to get them to run away, because it was getting ridiculous.
Yeah. I've wondered about that. If sometimes that might be the better way to go about it.
Right.
Just get them out of here.
Yeah, just go. And so they just kind of hung around for 10 minutes. I mean,
it was longer than 10 minutes.
Maybe, yeah.
It was like 30.
Yeah, I mean, you could hear them the whole time.
Oh yeah.
Because we were sitting maybe a couple hundred
yards
apart,
away.
but yeah, so it just turned into a cluster, and I ended up seeing one more doe. I don't know, maybe 20 minutes before shooting light was over, and that was that. But that was, I mean, seeing 5 does in a night again. I mean, that's a good night.
Yeah.
So I mean, that was a good day. I saw, 9 deer just in that one day.
Yep.
And then
we pulled trail cameras.
We looked at some pictures last night. And
fortunately, 2 of the 3 cameras didn't take pictures.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened. It appears that the cards were not formatted, so like the cards were full. Because when you look at the pictures, there's a bunch of old pictures of mine. So it would seem that I put the card in there, turned it on, and didn't reformat the cards. But I just cannot see myself doing that. I do this so many times, and that's like I don't even turn on the camera without first formatting. It's as much of a process as it is to like pull down your pants before going down the bathroom.
Hey man, it happens.
Interesting analogy.
Yeah. I've made that mistake. I'm sure it's.
Not
I can
pulling
make
down
that.
your
You
pants
can make
before you
that
go to the
mistake.
bathroom.
You took a dump.
No, formatting the card.
And it's been going back and forth like this the whole time we've been up here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what happened, but something happened,
Yeah.
which kept our 2 best cameras, like our 2 best spots that traditionally the past few years we've been getting good bucks on camera. Those didn't take any pictures from mid-October through mid-November, which is the one time period during the year we usually get good bucks.
Yep.
So I was kind of devastated last night. I was really upset about it.
There's a couple decent bucks on the one camera that we had, but a lot of critters, just bears. And
I mean, dozens and dozens of bears.
Yeah.
A couple coyotes, a couple bobcats, and some bucks, mostly young bucks.
Yep.
There was one buck maybe that could have been 3-year-old. A couple small 8-pointers, little 6, that kind of stuff that are maybe 1 or 2-year-olds.
Right.
It was good to see bucks. I mean, it's to the earlier point, in the past we didn't see any antler bucks, so it's nice to know there are antler bucks running around. And I gotta believe if we had the food plot cameras running, I bet you at least one nice buck would have showed up. Well, there was one nice buck on that one camera, like maybe a 3-year-old kind of tight and tall looking 8-pointer.
Yep.
So that was good to see, I guess. And then that takes us to this morning, right?
Yeah. And this morning I think I saw that tall and tight 8-pointer that was on the trail cameras. I saw one deer this morning, and it was the first deer that has made me pick up my gun since I've been coming up here for 7 years. This is 7. I think this is the 7th
It's been that
year
long? Wow.
I've been coming
6
up.
years, 7,
6,
something like
7,
that.
something like that. And it was the first time I picked up my gun and was looking through my scope and ready to pull the trigger.
So how'd it happen?
Well, I was sitting in the same spot I sat the day before, the evening before, and
Because it worked so well with those does.
yeah, it worked really well with those does. Yeah, I was just hoping that they wouldn't come back through there. They were just spooked and wouldn't come back through. And it was a slow morning. There's really nothing going on. And then, geez, what was that? Maybe 9:15ish, 9:30, maybe. Yeah, sometime around then, I just caught a flash of something working through the hemlocks and moving quick. It's one of those like moments where you're like, oh, that's a buck. Like, it's not a doe. It was cruising. It was just walking like a buck, or kind of cruising like a buck. And got my binoculars up, and as he was going through the hemlocks and all the trees and everything, I could just make out his antlers. Like, oh, that's a nice buck. And he got to the edge. He got to the edge of the hemlocks. I didn't have a shot yet. I needed him to take a couple of steps out into this pipeline. And instead of doing that, he had stopped at the edge of the hemlocks, and then he started working due west of me, right straight away from me, right down this pipeline, and just walked away. Tried grunting at him a couple times, and he did not care. He just was on a mission or something.
So this was a buck that you were like definite shooter.
Yeah, especially for up here. I was like, that's a shooter for up here. I thought he was probably judging his body coming through the woods. Like he looked like he was probably 3.5. Looked like he had some good antlers on him. I thought for sure he was a shooter for up here. So
Pretty excited.
he would have been. We're looking at a wall of racks here, and the top row is all the bigger racks that have been shot up here, and he definitely would have been a top row buck.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Yeah, I feel like even though our top row is not terribly impressive across the board, there are some.
Yeah.
But if you get a shot at something that would be a top row buck these days, it's hard not to pull the
Yeah.
trigger on that.
Yep.
Yeah. Just an editorial comment there. That top row used to be full of big racks, bigger racks than what are there. Back in the late 90s, we had a break-in, and they took many of our bigger racks. So now we're kind of refilling it.
Yeah.
Well, we almost had one to put up there today.
Yeah.
I know.
That would have been nice.
Yeah. So he walked away, and that was it. And that basically ended the morning. And I was in your guys' boat tonight. I didn't see a deer this afternoon. So
Yeah. No such luck for
Yeah.
us. I didn't see. I did. I remember thinking yesterday and this morning that I hadn't seen any deer, but I did see two of the does that spooked from you. They came running sort of by me, and I saw them back behind me. But otherwise, nothing. I did have a fresh set of bear tracks that came past me this morning. That had not been there in the evening before.
Yep.
And then we ended up getting pictures of him, I think.
Yeah.
We went and checked the camera again today because you thought that buck maybe walked past it.
yeah, I pulled that card tonight because I thought that buck. He did walk. I know he did. I know he probably did. But I don't know what happened with that camera because now it's like
It's an interesting
the
statement.
batteries are dead.
I know he probably did.
Well, he was heading in that direction unless he cut in to the swamp on the other side of the clear cut before he passed that camera. But my guess is he was working down the edge of that swamp.
Yeah.
So
So we got the picture. Didn't get the picture of the buck because of the batteries.
yeah.
But got the little bear on camera. It's kind of cool.
Yep.
Lots and lots of bears.
A lot of bears.
A lot of
And
bears.
I talked about this in the podcast already. I didn't talk about it with you guys, but I did see that bear last time I was up here. A bear, which was really cool to see. How would you have reacted, Dad, if you were sitting out here and a bear came walking up on you?
Probably can't say what I would do.
I feel like you're a little bit more on edge about the bears than I am.
Yeah. Oh,
Is
yeah.
that true?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think, I won't go in the woods without a weapon. I know that most of the time, especially here, the black bear are probably more afraid of us than we are of them. But, do I really want to take that chance and be the one time when, I have a pissed off bear?
Yeah, I get that.
But yeah, we've certainly seen a lot more bear evidence and bear themselves, and we've had some sightings. Our neighbor next to us a couple of years got a picture of a bear that he claimed was, and the DNR apparently confirmed it, was a 700-800 pound bear. I mean, a very large black bear.
I'm pretty sure that can't be right in retrospect, because I remember seeing numbers of like world record bears. But all that to say is we're just going to get an email from someone who's going to say there's no way that was 700.
It was a big bear.
It was a big bear. Say, we
it was
understand.
a big bear.
It was a big bear.
Yeah.
But yeah, we did see also, speaking of big bears though, the 6th largest black bear killed in the state or something like that was recently killed not too far from here. So certainly history would indicate some big bears around here, for Michigan at least.
Yeah, and we've had a number of cougar sightings as well, and animals that have been killed by them as well. So yeah, we've got a lot of wildlife.
There are some critters.
Yep.
So that's been our deer camp as far as deer sightings, animal sightings. Josh, you let us down.
Good thing I'm here.
Well, no, it's almost worse when it's right that close. It's so close, and then you just couldn't make it happen. It's like you're teasing us.
That's the story of my season. Close, but no cigar.
Yeah, I know.
I've had like 3 different. We won't get too much into it now, but I've had 3 different like shooter bucks, just not offer me a shot.
Can you give us like the 30-second cliff notes?
30-second cliff notes. Couple days before gun season, last time hunting one of the properties I have access to in Jackson, just a really nice buck was about 70 yards out and coming in, and he hit another trail and went a different direction. And I was debating on the tree stand where I was sitting and a tree stand setting a stand about 30 or 40 yards further towards where he came from. And if I would have set the stand there, I probably would have killed him that night. Got a text message from the other guy that hunts that property on opening day of gun season. He killed that buck. Really nice 8-pointer. That was a bummer. But happy for him. Opening day of gun season.
Really?
Yeah, why not? I mean, that's
the right thing to say.
It's a buck that I had no history with. It's a property that I have access with Corey, and I have no history with that buck. And hey, someone shoots a good deer, I'm happy for him.
I know, that's good.
I don't get too worked up about that kind of stuff. Opening day, I was hunting with Dustin, and a nice 10-point came just sprinting out into this bean field, and he's coming out right across, and I looked up and was like, holy cow, there's a nice buck out. And where did this thing come from? And he was probably like 125 yards out, and I grabbed my gun. I was getting ready, and I think what happened is he caught Dustin's scent, and then he stopped on a dime and went right back the way he came from. And so that could have happened if he would have given me another, 15 seconds to get settled in on him. Probably would have had a shot at him.
So do you blame Dustin?
Oh, I should, but no. And then tonight, this morning. So, that's 3 opportunities at good Michigan deer that just wasn't quite able to.
And you could even add that North Dakota close call, with that
North
nice
Dakota,
buck that came out
about
and
that.
just a little bit out of range.
Geez, that seems just like a whole nother season ago.
Yeah, that seems a long time ago now.
But yeah, so 4 different opportunities this year that just haven't been quite right. So
that is bow hunting.
Yep.
Deer hunting.
Good news is still got a little over a month left, and maybe something will come together for me.
Yep.
So
you never
know.
We'll see. So that's our sad story, I guess. The slow couple days and the tragedy of Josh Hilliard's 2018 deer hunting season. But the good news is that we are enjoying one of the best parts of the deer hunting season right now, which is deer camp. And even without seeing many deer, it is still one of the absolute best times of the year, isn't it?
Yep.
Sure is.
I mean, my dad's not a big drinker. But he's having a beer for lunch. He's having a beer for dinner.
Careful what you say. Your mom's likely to listen to this podcast.
Sorry, he had one O'Doul's. And one of my favorite things we always do is we always stop at the grocery store on the way up here, right? And it is the only guilt-free grocery shopping trip of the year where anything that looks good, you just throw it in there, no questions asked. So we've just been hammering food. Like I said, we had chili, and we had the deer heart, and we had how many cookies and
Oreos
Magic bars
and Cheetos and
yeah,
diet food.
yes, exactly.
Yeah,
diet
all
food.
sugar-free stuff.
So that's where we're at today. But we got to go back to what you were talking about, Dad. Go take us back to the beginning. You don't need to talk about any specifics as far as location and stuff, right?
Yeah.
Well, but walk us through what's the story of how we ended up here, right? You started hunting with your dad. Your brother and you started hunting with your dad a long time ago. Where did that start, and then how did you guys eventually get to this point?
We used to hunt further downstate in an area that, my dad knew about because of some friends and his brother that had hunted there for a long time. And, we'd go there every year. And this is back when I was 6, 7, 8 years old. And, we'd go there, and hunting was so different back then, right? You didn't have tree stands. You didn't do all the things we do today. We'd basically find a tree, literally find a big tree. I'd sit on one side, he'd sit on the other. And, the funniest things, we still saw a lot of deer, and we killed a lot of deer, I mean, sometimes I wonder what's really changed. But that time we hunted public land, and in that part of the state, it was really heavily hunted. There was a large deer population, so we saw a lot of deer, but you saw almost as many hunters. And, it was just kind of, it got a little old after a while. So one point, I think my uncle had come up in this part of the state and had been hunting up here, and told my dad about it, and told me about this big chunk of public land. And and it wasn't real heavily hunted and real thick. And so back in the late 60s, we started coming up here instead of going to the other place, and almost immediately started getting deer. And, we've never had, we're not talking about, Boone and Crockett 150s or anything like that, but still big deer for Michigan, and a lot of deer. And, so I'm 8 years old, 10 years old, and my brother, who's 11 months younger than me, we would always compete for who's going to go up with Dad to go hunting, and so my dad would take one of us up one weekend and then the other up the following weekend, and always had a great time. And back in those days, we were in an old pop-up trailer, nights like tonight when it's, 25 degrees or 20 degrees, and you'd be sleeping in a pop-up trailer with just a little kerosene heater to keep it warm. And we're little kids, and we're just freezing our butts off,
Do you remember in those kind of scenarios, in the moment, did you enjoy it? Or was it a situation in the moment you and Steve were just like, this is horrible, we're freezing, we want to play games?
It was both, to be perfectly honest. There were a lot, because we also had a little tent set up, a nice fishing shanty set up behind the trailer, which is where we did our dude, And
yeah, that's where they did their dude. So continue.
So, an 8-year-old kid having to wander out there in the middle of the night. And, of course, it had to be away from the trailer. It wasn't right next to the trailer, so it was a ways away. And that wasn't so great. But in this little kerosene heater didn't really keep that canvas, tent or the pop-up that we eventually had very warm at all. So we froze our butts off all the time. Mm-hmm. But, there was nothing like going in the woods and sitting down in what we called the potholes, which were these, a hardwood stand with really kind of rolling little bumpy hills and stuff that you'd sit in. And that ran along the swamp. And you see, and Grandpa would, like I said, be on one side and I'd be on the other. And, I'm freezing my butts off. And, he'd wrap us up. And what, that's the other thing. Clothing has come so far. All we had back then was, a flannel shirt and a red sweatshirt, and my mom would hand knit scarves and hats and gloves for us and that sort of thing. And those were great, but they didn't do a whole lot to keep you warm.
Yeah, but
I mean, you froze. Every once in a while, my dad was really hardcore. So we'd get up in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning. We'd have our 2-3 cups of coffee.
Were you having 2-3 cups of coffee at 7 or 8?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Really?
Oh, yeah. My dad fed me coffee pretty early. Oh, yeah. Uncle Steve, not so much, but I like coffee. And we'd be out in the woods, an hour before it got light, and we'd find our a spot by one of the trees, and Grandpa also built his own blinds. We'd build ground blinds. And, we'd be out there early in the morning, and Grandpa, good hunting technique. You'd have to be really quiet, and you had to be really still, and you always had to be looking, and he'd always encourage us and say, Dave, look at that. Do you see that there? And, there'd be something moving through the woods. And so, going back to your question, Mark, there were lots of things about hunting for an 8-year-old that weren't all that much fun. It was kind of like that old adage of, if I can remember it, incredible periods of boredom accentuated by moments of glory and delight. That's kind of the way deer hunting was for me.
And that's how it still is today in a lot of ways. For us.
But there's some of the best memories of my life, and being there with Grandpa. And then just like us, we're telling stories all night. We're playing cards. We'd always, at the end of the day, we'd usually go in. If we made dinner at camp, we would. But sometimes we'd go into town and have a burger or something. Come back to camp and play poker. And so our 8-10-year-old boys and Grandpa, we played like everybody else, and he'd teach us the rules of the game.
And you had a few other adults there with you too, right?
Yeah, we typically have.
Typically
4 or 5 of us typically would be there. Yeah, and we just have great stories. Always talking about stories of the camp and stories from people's past and stories from the hunt. And like you said, Mark, I think the 90% of the joy of being here is the camaraderie and where we are in this beautiful cabin and being in God's creation and outdoors, and being able to relate that and share that with each other. That's what it's all about. And doing that, I think, in the context of really trying to find just that right opportunity to kill the big deer. But Grandpa was also and taught me, and I think we taught you, that there's a tension and a real respect that we have to have for our prey and for the deer that we hunt, and for nature that we're part of. And as much as we want to get that big deer and put venison on the table, there's also we love that animal, and we love the privilege that we have for being able to partake in that.
Yeah, that's definitely something that it was always really hammered home for me growing up between you and GP, Grandpa. Just that, the seriousness of what we were doing. It was never something you would do carelessly. Mm-hmm. It was never something that was frivolous in any way. Taking an animal's life, as you said, was something to respect and to do with as much care as possible. Something that I never got to experience, or at least never could remember, was what Grandpa was like in the moment, after having shot a deer and walking up on it or something like that. Do you remember any experiences, what was he like in that moment? Because as a kid, I can remember him just being so serious.
Yeah.
And, it was just very, very serious with everything. I've never seen him really express like joy or anything over something like that.
You never saw Grandpa's face 30 seconds after he shot a deer.
I've never seen that. What was that like, and what was tell us.
Yeah. Well, so I'll tell you one story. I can tell you a lot of different stories, and these are all when I was 10 years old, 12 years old, young. And typically Grandpa would have, we'd sit with him. We'd go during hunting season, either myself or my brother Steve would be out with Dad. And we had like you mentioned, Mark, we had a group of my dad's friends that we also went hunting with, and they were great. So that I would hunt with one of them and Steve would hunt with the other. And again, we'd just sometimes we'd have a blind that we'd make, but a lot of times we just walk through the woods, find a place where we see runs coming through, where the evidence looked positive, and we'd sit. And yeah, Grandpa was real serious about his hunting. But, I can think of one time in particular, and it was just on the other side. This is before we got the cabin, but in the same area. As I was kind of walking through my story, I didn't get that far. But anyway, so over off the oil road, we were back off the maybe a couple 100 yards, 200-300 yards from the road, back in a swamp. And we'd been there all day, all morning. And I remember that morning, as the snow started to fall, and really big flakes, the half-inch size flakes just floating down through the sky and covering everything. And you know how you kind of get that that hush that falls over the landscape.
Dampening.
Yeah, I mean, it's just really
snow.
kind of surreal almost.
Yeah.
And I'm, and I did as much sleeping out in the woods as I did looking.
Some things never change.
Still do, don't you?
So I'm having a good nap, and suddenly Grandpa reaches over real quietly and just bumps my shoulder and says, Dave, wake up. I see something. And so I wake up, and of course I had to be really careful not to, make any noise or anything like that. And he points, and I see this deer just slunking his way through the pines and working his way towards it with his head down. And he's coming closer and closer, and Grandpa brings up his rifle and puts it on his shoulder and, and says, Dave, be quiet. Be really quiet. Watch. Pulls a trigger. And this darn deer, it turns out that this deer had a really atypical set of antlers, and one of the antlers is about 10 inches long, a perfect spike pointing straight forward. And it ran right at us at a full run. And just 10 yards, 15 yards, maybe 10 yards. I mean, it was really close. Grandpa shot again, and the deer just veered off to the right, literally a few yards from us. And so there was a combination of the really cool experience and getting the deer and kind of feeling like we just missed being skewered.
Yeah.
And so, another story real quickly, and I'll let you continue.
Well, you never told us about how Grandpa expressed himself afterwards.
Well,
what's he do?
Grabbed me and said, Dave, we got it, and jumped up and down, and this big smile across his face. And like you said, Grandpa's a pretty serious guy. And those were the times when we got our deer, or when we went fishing, and when we were doing outdoor hunting or fishing activities. Those are the times when I really saw the real Grandpa, because that's when he could be really relaxed and really enjoy himself, and really seemed like that was when he was the happiest. And I saw that day.
Okay, so your next story.
Well, so real quickly, kind of going back to my brother and I don't remember how old I was, again, maybe 10, 12 years old. And Grandpa had gone up with Uncle Steve.
This is the twofer story.
Yeah, this is the twofer story.
All right,
yeah.
good. I've been waiting for this one.
So this is back on the Oil Road, on the other side of the Oil Road. And again, late November, it had been snowing. I think Grandpa had to go to some academy he had to go to in Massachusetts, so he wasn't able to be there for opening day. So we went up the weekend after Thanksgiving, and that weekend, or maybe it was the middle weekend, I guess, because Uncle Steve went with him. And so they went up. Again, we had the camper, stayed in the camper. They went out into the pines and came home that night with the biggest deer I've ever seen. And Uncle Steve's all excited, big 8-point. By today's standards, probably 3.5, maybe a 4-year-old deer. I mean, it was a big deer for up here. Uncle Steve's so excited, and he's jumping all around, and he's bragging, like he would about, yeah, I got a deer. Look at this one. He's walking up to the side. We've got movies of him, walking up to the bottom of the deer, because we always hung our deer in the garage, and then typically we'd come back around a few days later, and we'd skin them, and we'd bone them out ourselves, and all that kind of stuff. But and I'm a little older than Steve, so of course not only am I jealous, but I'm kind of thinking, hey, I'm the oldest. I should have gone first.
Right.
What gives? So Grandpa felt bad. So and I keep saying to him, hey, Dad, let's go up. We're going to go hunting, right? We're going to get our own 8-point, right? And he's thinking to himself, well, how can I do that? There's no way I can, top this. Well, so the following weekend we went back up. And again, I'm, continuing to hound him, and I'm continuing to say, man, I'm so excited. This is great, Dad. We're going to get another big deer, right? And he's kind of thinking, well, sure, Dave, we're going to do our best.
Was he hedging a little bit?
Oh, he was definitely hedging. So we get back up, and we went back almost to the same spot. I don't know why we went to the same area, but it was along a little bit of a field and a swamp on one side, and hardwood, and then pines, kind of a half square kind of a configuration. We're walking down the edge of the swamp, and suddenly I hear Grandpa say, Dave, get down. We were walking, okay? So didn't really expect to see much in the way of deer at that point. And so I went down, and, he brings up his rifle and goes, Dave, it's a deer, looks just like the one I shot last week. Must be his brother. So I'm all excited. And I think Dad was or Grandpa was just shaking. I mean, you could just tell he was really excited, but also kind of it's this surreal thing, like how can this happen twice in a week, But he, again, he put the bead on and pulled the trigger, and we ended up bringing home 2 big 8 points, or the second 8 point for 2, in a week time, and hung it up right next to the second. And the thing, it literally looked like the other deer's brother. About the same size rack, almost the same configuration. 2 beautiful deer, and I got the opportunity to say, "Hey, I told you," to my brother.
Must have felt good.
It did. It was great.
That's awesome.
That's fun.
Yeah, it's funny. Speaking of always hanging your deer in the garage, Grandma always likes to tell a story about how she used to be appalled by that all the time. Like the smell of it made her sick, and then the smell of cooking venison. She cooked venison your whole lives growing up, right? Made a lot of venison. But she always talks now about how she can't stand the smell of it.
Yeah.
And how when she was pregnant, and I guess she was pregnant, she had 3 kids, and she always talked about how whenever she was pregnant, it would make her cry. She'd cry because the smell was so horrible. Is that right? Am I remembering
that
right?
must have happened before I can remember, because I don't remember that. I mean, Grandma was a great cook, and Grandma would make venison chop suey and venison barbecue and venison. I mean, she just came up with all these great ways to make venison. And like you said, we had venison for almost every meal, many, many meals. And the meals we didn't have venison, we'd have, lake trout or coho or whatever, because we ate a lot of game. And Grandma got really good at cooking all of that. Now, I think there's something to be said that you tend to like your mom's cooking better than whether it's good or not.
Right.
But I think in Grandma's case, it really was good and is good. And I loved it. As a matter of fact, I keep nagging her because I want her to make chop suey again, venison chop suey. She hasn't made that in 30 years. And I really miss that.
You gotta give her some venison.
I do. The way things are going, I'm gonna have to give her some of your venison.
Yeah. Hopefully we can change that soon. So continue with the original line of the story, though. So you guys had started hunting this northern public land. You had some great experiences. One of the stories you didn't mention, though, was when you guys were always sleeping in the pop-up camper, and how your brother one time, there's the beds on either side of the camper, right, that stick out, and then it sounds like there was kind of canvas walls that were very loosely attached.
Yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't he roll one day far enough over the edge of the bed and the canvas wall unattached, and he rolled right out of the camper?
Yeah, he did. Now, that one actually happened up in Canada when we were up on a fishing trip in Canada.
Oh, really?
But yeah.
I always thought that was here.
It may have happened a couple of times, but the one I'm thinking of happened up in Canada. And so we're all looking around for Steve. Where's Steve? It turns out Steve's outside on the ground. We got a lot of stories. But going back to how we found this place, we'd always come up here every year. We'd come up, and it's just like you guys do, right? We would come up in June and July and August and scout and dream about the season and talk about our plans and talk about all the things we're going to do, and we're going to try this and going to try this technique, and we're going to go over here, and so on and so forth. But we were always hunting public land, and the land was much more heavily hunted back then than it is today. And especially when I mentioned the oil wells and the drillers that came in and split things out and really, really improved the habitat for the deer in many respects. But again, one time we have a stream that runs right through the middle of this property, this area of state land that we were hunting. And we followed that stream one time through some lowlands in the swamp, and a big swamp. When I say swamp, I mean a lot of down trees, big spruces and conifers and that sort of thing. Very difficult terrain to get through, especially as a kid. Okay, so this is back in the early 60s or late 60s, early 70s. But we'd still kind of make our way through. And I remember one time, it would be an hour, maybe 2 hours of trudging our way through, and we came across this little opening, came through the opening after we got across the stream, and we saw this cabin. And we're looking at this cabin, and it was all by itself in the middle of nowhere. There was nothing around it. And at that time, we didn't even see the road or the little 2-track that went to it. And we kind of walked around, and I said, boy, this is really cool. Wouldn't you love to have that? And, kind of joked about it a little bit. It was obviously somebody else's, and we didn't want to bother it at all, so we just went back in the woods and hunted. Well, 10 years later, my dad ended up retiring early, and he was looking to get some property up here and that sort of thing. And he happened to be looking in the classifieds and saw that there was a cabin that was for sale, a place was for sale, very close to the public land that we used to hunt. So he came up and checked it out, and it turned out to be the same cabin that we saw as we walked through that one time. And it was in a little bit of disrepair. The owners, the current owners of it, had it. It was originally built in 1958. As a matter of fact, there's a little bit of interesting history to this land, the property that we have. So we have 40 acres. That's kind of embedded in 8,000 acres of state land. And but this area used to be cattle farmed back in the 18th century. And one of the things that my dad has is a deed, the history of all the deeds as was turned from generation to generation. And one of the deeds was signed by Abraham Lincoln back in 1860. Wow. Or something like that. Wow. So yeah, there's a little bit kind of an interesting history to it. But at any rate, we ended up the current owner of the property. His wife was ill. He was looking to sell it. My dad made an offer, and it ended up being a really good thing on both sides. He wanted to sell it for a good price. My dad was really eager to get the property, and we did a lot of work to it because it was in pretty bad disrepair at the time. But as you've probably described in the past, Mark, it's a 16 by 24 log cabin, knotty pine interior, really really simple, propane lights. It's nothing fancy at all, but big fieldstone fireplace in the middle. But for us, it's just got so many memories, and so we've hunted, and that was 1985 when we bought the cabin, and did a lot of work to it, put in a shed, did some other things, and we've hunted here ever since.
Before moving on, let's take a quick break to thank our partners at Whitetail Properties.
This week with Whitetail Properties, we are joined by Ben Harshine, a land specialist out of Iowa. And Ben is going to be talking to us about buying a property with the intentions of hunting whitetails as well as having cattle.
Well, I think that you can only get so far if you want to have great hunting and have cattle. In my area, I really don't have too many cattle operations in my area of expertise, but what I've seen, and I've hunted some cattle ground here, I think the most important part would be to separate where your pastures are and where the cows are mainly going to spend most of their time versus where you want to hunt. If you can have timber that's actually fenced off from that pasture, that's going to allow the timber to get nice and thick and separate those two environments between the whitetails and the cattle. A lot of guys will say that cows don't affect big deer, and I think it's really case by case. But I do know that whenever cattle are pastured in the timber, that keeps the undergrowth and the first, say 3 or 4 feet of important growth for a whitetail, that keeps that trimmed down. So most timber that's pastured is not ideal whitetail habitat. So if somebody is really looking to buy a farm and they want to run cows, I would try to find something, and have good hunting. I would try to find something where those two are separated with good fencing.
If you'd like to learn more and to see the properties that Ben currently has listed for sale, visit whitetailproperties.com/Harshine. That's HARSHYNE.
So do you remember then, and this is what I can't remember, I'm trying to remember your first gun or your first deer. Mm-hmm. Did that happen at Kenroven, or did that happen pre-Kenroven?
Pre-Kenroven.
Pre-Kenroven.
Yeah.
And Kenroven's what we call our camp.
Right.
Sorry. So can you walk us through that story? So that was back on the public land then, right?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, so it was over off the oil road again, and I was 16 years old, I guess. I had bought my first gun, which was over and under 410-22, which I was really proud of, right? Really cool gun. And I used to, like I said, I used to hunt with Grandpa until I turned 14, and then I started hunting on my own. Either because Grandpa wanted to make sure that he was fair to all the kids, or whatever. But my sister Sue would come and hunt with me for a lot of that time. And so Sue is 7 years younger than me. And she's a real trooper, right? she'd get bundled up in, all the scarves and the sweatshirts and the cheap Walmart boots and all the other things that, frankly, was really hard to get clothing and that sort of thing for adults, much less kids at that time. That was really warm. But for kids, it was really tough. You just had to kind of find snowsuits and that sort of thing and bundle them up as best you could. So Susie was bundled up, and so was I. But anyway, so I can remember one time we're out hunting.
Can I put a time out here?
Yeah.
So why did you get stuck taking your little sister out?
Well, that's what I've been trying to figure out.
But your dad, so your dad just eventually, all right, I'm just going to pawn her off on them now.
Yeah.
Did Steve ever have to take her?
I don't think so. I think either I was the nice one, never figured that out. She probably would say that I wasn't, but at any rate. So, like I say, I was 16, had my over and under 410/22.
And your 7-year-old sister.
And my so Susie would have been, she would have been 9 at that time.
Okay.
And so she's hunting with me, and we're going off the oil road back by the river, the stream that runs through that area of the property. I think it was opening morning, either opening morning or maybe the day after. One of those really beautiful early mid-November days, really cold and crisp. You could see for a long way. I was sitting on a kind of a mound underneath a clump of pine trees, big pine trees, looking off over the stream to my front to the left, and then behind us was the swamp. And I remember it really clearly because we're there. Susie's next to me, kind of behind me, and Susie was a real trooper, but she wasn't a really good sitter. Okay, so part of the reason why Susie would probably say that I wasn't a really good hunter with her was I constantly was telling her to be quiet, sometimes using stronger language.
Nice.
And then she'd get mad at me, and I'd get mad at her, and so on and so forth. Well, anyway, so we're sitting there, and Grandpa had dropped us off maybe an hour and a half before, and we've been sitting there a long time. And it's, again, a real cool, crisp November morning, and you could hear one of those mornings when you could hear the deer because the leaves were so crispy and that sort of thing. And lo and behold, about 9 o'clock in the morning, I remember it as if it was yesterday, I hear this crashing out to my right, and I immediately bring up my rifle. I had a nice scope on my rifle, or my 410. Brought it up and pointed in the direction of the crashing because I really couldn't see because it was behind the brush and that sort of thing. And, I kind of could tell there were multiple deer back there. And suddenly I started seeing flashes and white, the tails and that sort of thing coming through. So I just brought my gun over to an opening. And the whole time I'm saying to Susie, be real quiet. I see there's some deer going through. And she goes, okay, right, Dave, sure there's deer coming through. So I, put my scope in, looking through this opening, and literally in a second or so, this nice big 5-point steps right into the opening, and it was just one of those things. I just brought the crosshairs on his shoulder, pulled the trigger. He ran. The funny part is, Susie immediately stood up and started beating me, saying, "You killed a fawn!" And I look over and I said, "I didn't shoot a fawn." So what I think happened is there was a group of deer, and she thought I was shooting at one of the other deer. In fact, I was shooting another. But he ran 50 yards, and Grandpa came over, and we were really big and letting the deer sit and lay and bleed out and that sort of thing. So I went, pick up and run again. So a few minutes later, we walked over, and there it was, nice big deer. And Sue and I, of course, by that time, Susie realized what had happened, and we're celebrating, and, really cool thing. And, gosh, I got a chance to shoot a deer with my brother kind of thing. So last time I think Susie went in the woods.
She didn't stick with it, huh?
No, she didn't. No, but she was a real trooper. I mean, just the fact that she was out there with us and, with a bunch of guys. So it was 5 or 6 guys in a trailer. And, 9-year-old little girl was out there with us and putting up with all the guy stuff and the poker and the cold night with a kerosene heater and, the outdoor latrine and all this other stuff. She did really well.
Yeah. So you guys got the cabin.
Yep.
Years later.
Yeah.
How did stuff change after? Did things change? Do you feel like did the camp change? Did the culture change? Did the hunting change? What was different after that point?
Yeah, I think it changed a lot for a number of reasons. I mean, up until that point, we were a little like, like wanderers. I mean, we had our areas where we'd like to hunt, and we kind of scouted them, and we knew them, but they really weren't our own. And at any given time, you could go to some place that was your favorite hunting spot, and there'd be somebody else sitting there, right? I mean, that's how hunting is, especially on public land. And but once we had our own property, and like I said, we have 40 acres that's adjacent to and kind of embedded in 8,000 acres of public land. And that public land, you can't get to that public land except going through the private property. So it's really pretty private. And so it was really nice to be able to, build permanent blinds. This is before the time of, tree blinds and stuff, tree stands. But, to be able to scout and have some confidence that you could hunt the areas that you're scouting, and that you could start being more strategic about your hunting. You could start doing those kinds of things. So I think it changed a lot. And then, of course, having a cabin to stay in every night, and, with a nice big fireplace and a stove and all the other things made a world of difference as far as the comfort. And having a deer camp, having a place to call our own, as modest as it is, and it is very modest, was really nice.
Yeah. Did you guys have a buck pole at?
Yeah.
Did you guys make a temporary buck pole?
Oh yeah, we did, and we have a buck pole that we made less temporary, more permanent. There are many times we'd have 2, 3, 4 deer hanging from that buck pole, as you know. And one of the stories that I remember is you had to be. So I'm going to go back and Mark. So we had the cabin, obviously, when Mark started coming up here, and so Mark was born in '87. Mark started coming up here in probably 90, so about 3 years old. Those first couple of years, and Mark was he just adored my dad, right? He looked up to him and hopefully me to some extent. But my dad was really kind of the patriarch of the family and the patriarch of hunting camp, right? And he was the one who told all the stories about, the hunting up here, the things we used to do, all the things we saw, and all the hunting trips up here. And then KT, remember KT, Mark? I'll let you tell that story.
Well, KT, I don't think we told this story last year, did we, Josh?
No, I don't think so. I don't know this one.
So KT,
which stands for Ken Roven Tilly.
Ken Roven Tilly. I don't know where GP came up with this
I don't know
stuff.
where I came up with.
But you know what's funny is as I sit back and try to think about why I am the way I am in a lot of ways, I do think that GP was the storyteller of the family, right? Yeah. He was always a storyteller. I think that probably rubbed off on me. And one of the stories he always used to tell me was about KT. And I don't remember what her name was originally, but there was this young girl who went out hunting with her dad. Right here. She went out hunting out here, this is local, and her dad went out hunting on opening day, and they went out sitting, and it was one of those nights where it was really cold and snowy and everything, but you could tell there was a front blowing in. You're sitting there, and there's a noise, and this deer comes walking out, and dad shoots the buck. Gets the deer, and the deer runs off, though. But for whatever reason, KT's dad says, well, hey, you stay right here. I'm going to go get the buck. You just stay here. Don't leave this log. And when he leaves that log and leaves KT, and her name is, I don't know, Karen, maybe we'll call her. Karen sits on the log. Dad goes to look for the buck, but it ran off out of distance. Well, as soon as he leaves, that front pushes through and it starts snowing. And it's snowing and snowing and snowing. And the dad never does find that buck, but he tries to come back to find Karen. He can't find Karen either. And he walks all over the place, can't find Karen. Goes back to town, gets the locals come out, and they walk and walk and walk, and they can never find Karen again. Well, Karen had been lost out there in the woods, and she ended up wondering what happened to Dad, and she starts walking around trying to find him, and she's lost in the snow, and she ends up getting really cold and scared, obviously. She's 7 years old or something, and she, and I'm kind of paraphrasing and embellishing a little bit as I remember the story. But as I remember the story going, in one way or another, I can't remember if she got cold and she snuggled up into a hole or what happened, but one way or another, this little baby girl got found by a pack of coyotes, and the pack of coyotes adopted her and took care of her. And little Karen grew up with the coyotes and became the wolf lady of the woods out here.
But she never forgot Ken Roven.
She never forgot Ken Roven, and so she then became Ken Roven Tilly. What's Tilly?
So
What's
Grandpa,
Tilly?
Grandpa used to, when Mark was young, he used to say, Mark, be really careful, because sometimes in the middle of the night, if you look out one of the windows, you'll see KT looking up with her hands up on the window, looking in, trying to get in to get the warmth by the fireplace.
Yeah, so KT at this point, by the time I was 7 or 8 years old, KT was an old lady that ran around. She ran around on all fours with long gray hair, and so I would sit here. This used to be a couch, my favorite couch, until my dad threw it away the other year, which I will still not forgive you for. Now it's a lousy cot. But this big window right across the way, I would always sleep here, and that window was right in front of me. And every night, I'd be afraid to look out that window because I just knew that KT would be staring in at me. And one time, I was sitting here by myself. For some reason, all you guys were gone, and I was in here by myself, and it was just about dark. Maybe for some reason I hadn't gone hunting one night, but everybody else did, and I stayed in here, so it was like last light. And it's that edge of daylight in the evening where a dark shape can morph into anything, Like you see that sometimes when you're sitting out there in the morning and it's just about daylight, but at this point, like, is that a deer coming? And then it finally becomes daylight and you realize it's a bush, or it's, something that's obviously not a deer. Well, it was that time of night. And I swore KT was sitting here at the edge of the pines about 70 yards away, standing in the corner, just kind of almost like a coyote sitting on his haunches. That's what she was doing. And you can see this long gray hair and looking right at me, and I just remember running back to the couch and burying my head in the couch and not wanting to move till you guys got back.
I just figured
I was
something
18
out.
years old, and, it was a bad night.
Yeah, 18 years old.
No, probably 7 or 8.
I think I figured something out. I think I now know why your Aunt Sue never came back up hunting.
Oh, because the KT stories, maybe. Yeah.
All right, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I feel like I should know this, and I feel like I probably did know this at one time. But Kelly asked me, where does Ken Roven come from? Where does the name of the camp come from?
Yeah.
And I couldn't answer. I can't remember.
Dead?
Well, I wish I could say for sure, but I think
I know why for sure.
Do you know?
Yeah, I do.
Well, why don't you say?
Okay. The story I know, and you correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
But the story I know is that there is a fishing lodge off of a river around here. I think it's the Pierre Marquette or some other river. And he had floated the river and fished by it and knew of this lodge and had seen it. And it was called...
Your grandpa?
My grandpa,
Yeah.
yep.
Okay. Yeah.
And the lodge is called Dunroven. And when they bought this place, he thought, you got to have a name for this place. And that kind of popped in his head, and he liked that name Dunroven. So he's like, well, why not just take Kenyon and Dunroven and put them together, and he called it Kenroven.
Yep. That's the story I know as well.
Okay. Yep. So that's what I've heard.
And for your listeners, so we have coming into our camp, we have this big, Western ranch style entryway that used to have this big, maybe 6-7 foot wide by a foot or two deep sign hanging from it with big wooden letters spelling Ken Roven. So it made a real kind of unique kind of setting as you came in. And, we're a ways off any road. We're half a mile off of many roads and just a little tiny 2-track with nobody else around us. So it's really kind of cool.
Yeah. So where the heck were we before that? Oh, so we talked about KT, talked about how we got the name. Okay, yeah. So what I was curious about, you were starting to talk a little bit about when I started coming up here.
Yeah.
And that was something that I'm always curious to hear a little bit more about. So you said I was about 3 when I started coming up here.
Yeah. So those first few years, so we had built a blind out north of our property, out maybe 300-400 yards on the edge of the swamp. And we built it was a ground blind, but it was a really nice blind. So it was pretty well built up and with walls that provided some cover and a top. Grandpa was really big into top, so we always had top covered, which was kind of nice, a little bit like a condo.
I feel like we need to paint this picture a little bit better, though, because today when people think ground blinds, ground blinds are much different than a Kenyon ground blind. Ground blinds now are like fiberglass manufactured, beautiful buildings. The
This
ground
is
blinds of
anything
the
but that.
Kenyon household were usually maybe now he would put a few like 4x4 posts in the ground,
Yeah.
and then sometimes there'd be like a strip of metal across the top or like some
Corrugated plastic.
corrugated
or something that provided
plastic
the roof. Yeah.
on the top, and then he'd like to use like AstroTurf carpeting. They would go around the wall, so your walls would be AstroTurf
And then we'd spray
carpeting.
paint it. He'd
and you
spray paint it with
paint
black paint.
And then for some reason, then he would take gutter mesh, the metal gutter
Yep.
fencing or whatever that is, and you put that all over the top and bottom of the window openings.
Which you couldn't see through.
You couldn't see through. But there's a little gap, obviously, for you to shoot through. But I think he wanted to add that there. My assumption is that it was somewhat see-through for you, but it would break up your outline for the deer, which I get.
Right.
And then sometimes he'd put like a chain link curtain almost for the entryway. Like that's what's on his blind.
No, you know what those were? Those were fireplace screens.
Fireplace screens.
That's what they were.
Yeah, that's right. So that is the type of ground blind that we're talking. And those are the top end ground blinds. We had lower end ground blinds, but these are the top end ground blinds. Had the AstroTurf carpet.
So we had a top end ground blind that
Yes.
we had built, and it was a twofer. So we intentionally built it so we could put 2 chairs on there and that sort of thing, with the intention of sometimes Grandpa would hunt with either my sister if my sister came up, or some of the young cousins and that sort of thing.
And this is this is after your sister.
Yeah, this is after the sister. Yeah, but at any rate,
Grandkids
but this is big enough for you. And so the first memory I have of Mark, hunting with me, is getting into this blind. He's about 3 years old. We got him all bundled up, and clothing improved a little bit then, so we had some better clothing and that sort of thing, and some boots. We bought Sorels from Meyer or whatever. And we brought a bag of toys, to kind of keep Mark entertained. And I remember this was really happening for the first season or two that, got in there. He's really excited to get out in the woods. And he's sitting next to me and he's asking me questions. Dad, what do I do now? And where do I look? And so on and so forth. And we talked. And within about half an hour or so, Mark's on the bottom of the ground in front of in the blind, playing with the toys and playing airplanes.
You know what's really funny is that's what Josh still does. When he goes out.
But I got to tell you, that changed. So and Mark just always loved being part of deer camp, and I can't forget. It was about that age, maybe 4, and we had a particularly successful year. We had 3 deer hanging on the buck pole, and
3 deer.
Yeah, 3 deer. Yeah, 1 or 2 of them were pretty good size bucks. And Mark, you've got movies of this, of Mark walking out in his flame orange sweatshirt and bundled up. He looks like a Michelin man dressed in orange. Mm-hmm. He's walking underneath the deer, and he's pointing up at them and he's looking up, and you could just tell when we'd all be inside the cabin, playing poker and that sort of thing. Mark would disappear, and we'd go outside. Where's Mark? We'd go out with a flashlight and shine around, and here's Mark standing under the deer, looking up at the deer, and I could just imagine he's thinking, I'm going to shoot me one of those someday.
Yep.
So, but the real seminal moment for me, the time when I knew that it was all over for me, was about maybe 5 years later. Mark was maybe 9 years old, maybe 10, and we're actually back in the same place, same blind. And it was another cold morning. Mark and I were hunting together. Mark's a little bigger, little louder. And so this particular time, we're in the woods, and we're hunting, and we're out there. And for whatever reason, Mark had gotten pretty aggressive. And at that point...
What? I've gotten pretty aggressive.
He's
what does that mean?
He's been reading. He thinks he knows everything there is to know about deer hunting, and so he's telling me about, Dad, you have to make sure you do this and you make sure you do that. And he's 8 years old or 9 years old, okay? By the way, some things never change.
Yeah, have you hunted with him now? Yeah.
But I'll never forget. I have a vision challenge. So for me, it's sometimes hard to see things distance, right? So I'm there and we're hunting, and Mark kind of jabs me in the side and says, Dad, there's a deer coming right through there. And so and of course I still think I'm a father. So I said, okay, Mark, be really quiet. And he goes, Dad, I'm quiet, okay? So I'm waiting and Mark says, Dad, he's getting closer. Dad, he's right behind the tree.
Well, and it's a buck. It wasn't a deer.
It was a buck. Yeah, it was a big buck. Yeah,
it was the first buck that we had ever seen together while hunting.
Right. And I, for whatever reason, I just didn't see it. Right. Yeah. And I, brought my rifle up and I was pointing in the wrong direction because I didn't see the deer and it wasn't making any noise. And Mark's just finally, after about 10 minutes of this deer sneaking its way through. Well, whatever.
It felt like 10 minutes.
It felt like longer to me. So finally, you could just see the virtual Mark puts his hands on his hips and says, "Okay, Dad, just give me the gun."
And I did. I did. I remember being like, "Dad, just give me the gun. Just give me the gun. Dad, just give me the gun." And you wouldn't give me the gun.
You were 8 years old.
And I remember coming back to camp. And as my older self now looking back on it, I feel really bad about it, actually. I imagine you probably felt bad about the situation. Mm-hmm. And then you have your little snot-nosed punk 8-year-old son come back to camp and tell everyone, well, we saw this buck. Dad couldn't see it. Dad couldn't see the buck. I tried telling him the buck's right there, and I wanted the gun. He wouldn't give me the gun. Couldn't see it. So if I were you, I wouldn't have been surprised. You could have just knocked me over the head, and I probably deserved it. But I do remember that. And I remember I can see exactly where that buck walked through in my mind's eye right now.
Well, but there's another seminal moment. So there's these things that, just like you have kind of milestones in your life that you think about it. The whole world changed when you got to that milestone. Mm-hmm. So that event with the "Gee, Dad, just give me the gun, I'll shoot." That was one of those seminal moments. Okay. But there was another one. It was actually a little bit before that, maybe 6, maybe 7. So always to that point. I would lead the way as we went into the woods. I would forge the trail, and I'd find my way through the brush and back to the blind, and Mark would diligently and dutifully follow me. Well, something happened around 7 years old. He decided he wanted to lead. And suddenly, instead of me saying, "Mark, now you got to be really quiet, make sure to look for deer," Mark was saying, "Dad, you're too loud. You got to be really quiet. Look for deer, Dad." I knew it was all over.
Yeah. No, I don't remember when I remember, but I do remember at some point after the give me the gun incident. It was sometime after that incident when I don't even know. I don't remember when it was that I remember, but at some point it definitely, the role shifted in my mind where it went from you telling me what to do to me telling you what to do. And it definitely was before it probably should have. And so, I just, God, Dad coughs so loud, he sniffles so loud, he moves so loud, he moves too much.
Some things haven't changed, have they?
No. Oh, man. But yeah, a few of the moments that stand out to me, I definitely remember the give me a gun incident. And then you talked about that when I was standing out there looking at the buck pole. Mm-hmm. The year I remember was the year that I've told this story many times on the podcast, so everybody probably knows the story. But it was 1995. It was the year that GP shot his big 7-pointer, the biggest buck that's on the wall right now. And that's the year I remember walking out and recovering that buck in the snow. And then there's the 2 big bucks on the buck pole, and I remember that year looking at those just for days, just going out there and standing and looking. But
the other thing I'd say, Mark, just another thought. You were always a really important part of deer camp for us. So, I guess one of the call outs I'd make to all the listeners is, bring your kids with you. It is such an important thing to have your kids be part of the experience. And I think for you, for us, this group of men, multi-generational group, 5, 6, 7 of us, some of us, as old as 65, 70 years old probably at that point. And then there was you. And I think that just it brought freshness and the spirit and the joy of hunting because you're passing it on to the next generation, and you see the excitement and the just the fascination that a young person has as they're going out in the woods and they're shooting their first deer and they're experiencing all these things. I just can't say how important that is enough.
Yeah, we did a podcast a couple months ago, me and 2 of my friends, talking about introducing your kids to the outdoors and trying to, help create a new hunter. Mm-hmm. And all of us were speaking far ahead of our turns because I had only been a dad for like 5 months at that point.
Yeah.
And one friend had only been a dad for like 5 or 6 years. And another guy had been a dad for 10 years. So they hadn't had a successful end result yet. You raised a son who really got into hunting, so much so that his whole life basically revolves around it now. So you really won that one. You figured that out. So what do you think you did right when it came to raising a young kid to become a hunter that maybe you could pass on to folks that would hope to do the same?
Do you remember the what I used to say? Feed the habit.
Feed the habit.
Feed the habit. What did that mean?
Well, you had a tough love way of raising me in a lot of ways, and it was really important to you that I had to work for just about everything. Right? You weren't going to give me a car. You weren't going to give me this. You know, whatever it was, like
Most
I had
of
to
your
work
college
for.
education.
Yep.
Yep.
So very few things were given to me easily, but one thing that I was spoiled on was hunting or fishing gear, because you said there was one thing that you wanted to feed the habit. That was something that you thought was really positive, that you thought was productive for me to be spending my time doing. And so that was one area where you would, if I showed an interest and really wanted to get involved with something, you would definitely make sure that that could happen.
You know, and I think the other thing we try to do is we always try to buy decent gear, because I think one of the things that I remember going back to my childhood, tromping through the woods with clothing that was just terrible clothing to be out in the woods with, right? I mean, I got cold almost as soon as I walked out of the camper. I was cold. Boots that your feet constantly froze in. Field glasses that were, Kmart specials. I mean, just, I think you don't have to go out and buy the best equipment, but I think there's a lot to be said. We all, as hunters and fishermen, we're always looking at the greatest gear and the gear that we ourselves can go out and use to do our hobby. But don't forget your kids. And again, you don't have to buy the best equipment, but don't buy the cheapest. Give them gear that they're going to get excited about and is going to allow them to have that kind of experience. And I think that's what we try to do with you.
Yeah. No, I mean, I definitely. Although, to tell you the truth, I remember having to buy my own first real set of like camouflage gear, and I bought it myself. I remember I'm sick of wearing this lousy hand-me-down orange jacket or something. I remember.
Well, there were exceptions.
Yeah, there were a few exceptions. I remember when I started working at Gander Mountain is when I really upped my hunting quality gear. Took it to a new level there.
Well, and when I say buying good gear, I mean some of that came later and largely because of you.
My discount, probably.
20%
My Gander Mountain discount.
Absolutely, man. That was great. That was one of the worst days of my life when you quit.
I think I've helped make up for it since.
Yeah, a little bit.
But that's funny. Another story that just popped in my head that now we're really fast forwarding the clock. But now, I don't know, I'm a teenager or something like this, and I can't remember. I've told this story to many people. I don't remember if I've told it in the podcast, but one of my favorite Ken Roven stories that involved you. Josh, do you remember if I told this story? Do you know the story I'm going to tell?
Mm-mm.
It's the night walk story.
I don't think I know this one.
I remember.
I don't think
it.
you told
No.
this one.
You don't know the night walk story?
I don't think so.
I think you'll know it when I tell it.
Maybe, yeah, maybe.
So, and this has to do with my grandpa. And we talked a lot about how he's a pretty serious individual. Like, he was not, at least around me, I never knew Grandpa as like a jokester. He could have a good time, but he was not traditionally that type. So we're all in here in the cabin late at night after hunting and sitting around the fire just like we're doing right now. And my dad and my uncle thought, it's hot in here, right? The fire's really, really warmed it up in here. Beautiful night outside. The stars were out. One of the two of you said, why don't we go for a walk down the road, down the 2-track? So Bill and Dave go, and they're going to go for a walk down the 2-track. All the rest of us staying here, sitting around talking. 10, 15 minutes goes by. We're chit-chatting. GP goes out to the bathroom. We're still sitting around here and, telling stories and restoking the fire and everything. And another 5 minutes goes by, and then all of a sudden you hear boom, 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 and footsteps come running up the deck, and the door flies open, and my dad and Bill run in here, and my dad's bent over, hands on his knees. You guys wouldn't believe it. I'm like, what in the world has happened? And then Bill and Dad go on to say that they're walking down the road, and all of a sudden they hear, well, what did you hear? Tell us, what did you hear?
I heard this blood-curdling screech. Is what I heard.
I don't think you heard a screech. I thought you heard the crashing and like the growling.
Oh, it was both. It was both. It was the screech and then the growling and then crashing after that.
Well, how do you explain the screech?
I don't know. I mean, it was just Grandpa making a loud noise, I guess.
Well, because when you guys came running in here, you thought that there was a bear.
Oh, yeah, we did.
So
We did.
You described this bear having been like crunching through the woods, making a bunch of noise and coming towards you, and then you and Bill come running all the way down the road, all the way back to camp, freaking out.
Maybe it was Bill that screamed.
Yeah,
No,
that might be it.
But you're absolutely right. We looked at each other, and we had flashlights, but they were both, I think the batteries were pretty low because we didn't really have much light. And it was just one of those things where, it was already it was a beautiful night, but it was also kind of a creepy night. And I don't know if you remember, that was the time when we had the coyotes in large quantities around us. So we had, groups of coyotes that seemed like they were just a couple hundred yards away. So, I mean, just the atmosphere was really kind of spooky and just kind of, So, Uncle Bill, it's pretty hard to scare Uncle Bill, right? He's a pretty big, burly, or not big, but it's certainly a strong and powerful wrestler type. And not much would scare him. But we heard that, and I don't remember what we were talking about. We must have been talking about something that kind of set us up for it, because I remember hearing that. We looked at each other, wide-eyed, saucers for eyes, and and Uncle Bill and I just did a dead heat back to the cabin.
Oh, man.
And,
Did you ever think that it obviously couldn't have been a bear, because we know that Bill was faster than you, so you would have been eaten probably if it had been a bear, right? Right? You only need to outrun one person.
Yeah, that's right. Just need to outrun the slowest guy.
Uh-huh. So Bill won the race back to camp.
Mm-hmm.
And you come running in here and you tell us, oh my gosh, there's a bear or something out there.
Yeah.
And we're like, oh man, that's crazy. And then a couple minutes later, we hear steps on the deck again. And then we realize, oh geez, Grandpa hadn't come back from the bathroom yet. And he opens the door and he looks in here at us. And then he just starts laughing, didn't he?
That's the first time in my life I can remember Grandpa doing a practical joke. and so I don't know which was worse, just the shock of what had happened, or knowing that it was Grandpa that did it to us.
Yeah, so Grandpa had snuck out into the woods.
Yeah.
Worked his way around you guys, and then made a. It's so unlike him, and so hilarious.
It was. Yeah. We had a lot of great time.
Yeah, that was very funny. We got a lot of good laughs out of that one. Are there any other moments up here that stand out? You talked about different seminal moments with me, or with him, or with anyone else. Any others that stand out for you, Dave?
So this is maybe an example that of one that stands out for relatively recent, and we've joked about this. This happened, was it last year or the year before? Haven't gotten a deer up here in a while. I think it was 2 years ago, I guess it was. So I have a blind I call the trench blind, which is down from the cabin 100 yards or so. And it's a, for us old guys, it's an easy walk.
We'll say that Dad is very particular about his entry and exit routes. Out of his tree stands. We'll spin it that way for you, Dad. You're really good at entry and exit. So a smooth, quiet 100 yards down from the cabin.
So it's a beautiful, beautiful evening. Mark and Josh went out.
Just Mark.
Went out south. It was
Josh
just
wasn't
yeah,
here.
that's
I
right.
wasn't
Josh
here
wasn't
yet.
here. Yeah. So it was about 3:00. Mark and I finished up what we were doing, had dinner or lunch rather, and Mark takes off and goes south, goes to his tree stand over the food plot, and so I decide I'm going to go out and hunt the trench blind at night. And I've seen a lot of deer at the trench blind. It's been a pretty good place for deer, despite the easy access and et cetera. It's been a good blind. So I get over there. It's about maybe 4:00 or so, 2:45, because of course I don't go in quite as early as Mark does. So I get out there and
It was
the first
5
time.
or quarter. No,
No, just kidding.
no,
Not that bad. But I get out there and I notice that, now this is a kind of similar kind of blind to what Mark was describing before. So it's a grandpa blind. It's it's got the corrugated top and the 4x4s on the corners and the AstroTurf around the side and et cetera. And it used to have the gutter
stuff.
Yeah, but I've tore that down. But at any rate. And so I get there and I notice that some of the carpeting had fallen down on the side. So, I look at my watch and it's 3:45 and I say, well, I got plenty of time. Of course, Mark would tell you that Dad's not quite the hardcore hunter that he is. And this
not quite.
Just not quite.
Not quite. Yeah. Just by a little bit.
So I go, I'm close to the cabin. So I go back to the cabin. I get the staple gun.
Can you imagine what I would have done if I'd been there and seeing this?
That's why I did it after you left. Mark will never know. Things have really changed when you gauge everything you do by what Mark would do. Yeah. So I sneak back out to the blind.
You didn't sneak.
And I staple up the carpeting.
I'm surprised Mark didn't hear that from him.
Yeah, probably could have. I was busy. I wasn't a climber, so I was climbing up. At this moment, I was climbing up in my climbing tree stand.
And you didn't hear anything, did
I
you?
didn't hear it, but that's because I was making a whole bunch of noise.
Yeah. So, I made the very discretionary and wise move. I decided not to bring the staple gun back to the cabin. I just put it on the chair, and I sit down and get settled and bring my rifle up. I kind of start scanning with my glasses and, looking for deer. And suddenly I hear some crashing out to my right. And look over, and here's a beautiful, turned out to be a 5-point. Nice, beautiful deer, sneaking his way through from the right towards my center. And literally, just one of those things. Who was really close to me. Frankly, I thought he'd see me and take off. Mind you, this is 5 minutes after I stapled the carpeting.
Yeah, and what I love though is that you had the audacity to. You see the buck, he's walking in, and then he noticed that one of the AstroTurf carpet flaps is still flapping. So you grab the staple gun. Let me fix that.
No, I didn't do that. But anyway, so I brought the scope up and put the crosshairs on his shoulders and pulled the trigger, and deer runs off, and I text Mark.
No.
You tell the rest of the story. I'll let you tell the rest of the story.
You pull the trigger. You shoot this deer.
Yeah.
I had just gotten settled in my climbing tree stand. It's like 3:30 or something like that. Mm-hmm. I had just gotten settled. And I'm just sitting down. I think I just pulled out my gun. And then all of a sudden, kaboom! Jump out of my pants. I mean, so close to me. So loud. And it's 3:30 in the afternoon. And it came from right where you're sitting. And the first thing I thought was, oh, my God. My dad fell and the gun went off and he shot himself or something. Like, there's no way he shot a deer at 3:30.
Well, first of all, it's my dad.
Second of all, it's 3:30 in the afternoon.
And he's 100 yards from the cabin.
Yeah, like, there's no way this could be a good thing. Yeah. So immediately I panicked. I was like, oh, my God, something really bad just happened. And I was about to climb down, and I thought, I'm going to give him I was either going to give you 1 minute and then call you, or maybe I called you immediately. I think I called you immediately. Mm-hmm. And it's like, if he doesn't answer, I'm running over there. Like, we got to figure out what's going on. But I was scared. I wasn't excited. I was, like, scared. And I call you, and then you picked up, like, what just happened? I shot a buck. You what? You shot a buck? It blew my mind. Absolutely blew my mind. Couldn't believe it. It was crazy.
It blew your mind, and you had no idea about the staple.
Yeah, I didn't even know about the staple incident yet. If I'd known that, color me surprised. The whole thing was pretty wild. Yeah, but yeah, we went over there and waited an hour, and then tracked him right to where he was at, and that was a cool moment.
Yeah,
that was the first. I mean, that was the first moment like that we got to share together.
Mm-hmm. In a long time.
Yeah, I guess we killed the buck with me a few years before that back in southern Michigan, right?
Yep.
But that was the first one up here. Mm-hmm. So that was really cool. That was a good one. Josh, do you have any?
You have some further stories?
Do you have any further stories you need to share, or any other questions about the history of this place, stories, or?
I mean, My one story from up here is one I'd rather not share.
I think
It's been
we've already
shared
shared
plenty
it.
of times.
Yeah.
Not one of my finer moments, but that's really the only dumb thing I've done up here, and that's pretty good for me.
I was going to say, I mean, you calendar your events by how many dumb things you've done.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I try to
that's-
focus really hard when I'm here so I don't do anything stupid.
I'm just really glad I'm not alone.
Yeah.
Do you guys, like, when I'm not around, do you just, like, commiserate about what an asshole I am or something? Is that basically what you guys talk about? That Mark guy, jeez. Who brought him along?
Oh, man.
Oh, well, it is always good to be up here. I mean, I could keep asking you to just tell story after story. I just love hearing all the old stories.
Yeah.
And I was like that when I was 7 years old, and I'm still like that now at 31, and hopefully at 47 I'll still be the same way.
Well, as a dad and a new grandfather, my excitement is being able to share that all over again with your son, Everett.
Yeah, I am very, very excited. I was already thinking about that tonight. I told you earlier today that I'm thinking about kind of taking Grandpa's old ground blind. He had a spot that used to hunt here the most, and I hunt around that area now. It's kind of become my little zone that I hunt a lot. We've been working on these food plots around there, and I killed my first buck at Kenrovan near there, and so I kind of inherited that spot. And his old ground blind, though, we haven't really done anything with since Grandpa passed, and it's kind of fallen under disrepair, and the bears have kind of tore it up, and so the foundation, like the poles are still there, and the roof's still there, but all the carpeting's fallen down, and the gutter stuff's fallen down, and the little fireplace screen's still there. But I was standing out in front of it today, and actually, interestingly, it's weird. You know, I told this story a couple weeks ago, and you had told me this, well, mid-October, me and Furter are here, we're hunting. I'm sitting this tree stand overlooking this field, little food plot now. You can see the ground blind, and as I was sitting there, I was thinking about Grandpa and thinking about all these memories and thinking about the first sit I ever had out here, which had been in that ground blind, and that first moment I remember seeing deer. And I'm thinking about all these things, and then this black bear shows up underneath me. First time I'd ever seen a bear up here. Really cool moment. And, you know, I did a video about it and things like that. And then you, Dad, texted me a couple days later, or a week or so later, and you said, well, what was the date of that? And I said, well, it's October 15th.
Yeah.
And you said, well, that was exactly 6 years to the day of his passing, right? That was the 6-year anniversary of his passing.
Yeah.
So that was like, oh, wow. Like, that was like such a kind of a wild thing to have happened that day as I was thinking about him and all that stuff right there.
Yeah.
And interestingly, today, I'm back out there again, and I go out there to hunt, and I'm walking across the plot in the morning, and I notice fresh bear tracks walking across the plot. And I follow those fresh bear tracks, and they literally walk 2 steps away from the ground blind. They walk right to the blind and just divert right around it by 2 steps.
Wow.
Walked right by Grandpa's blind. And so it's almost like the bear walked me to the blind. And then I was like, well, I should hunt there tonight. And so I sat there tonight thinking about more, and I told you, Dad, that you know what? I think I should fix it back up again.
Yeah.
And that should be the first place that Everett hunts when he comes up here with me. Kind of full circle. The first place I sat, and now I can take my son to sit there again. And it's kind of like this, you know, I don't know what it is, spirit animal or whatever it is. The bear kind of led me to it again after that cool moment earlier in October. I don't know. It's all kind of strange coincidence or something, but kind of cool. So I think that's what I'm going to do. Going to get that fixed up again, and can't wait to take my son up here and to introduce him to all these things and these stories, and you know, it's gonna be pretty awesome.
And you know, we talked about how his grandpa, by and large, was a pretty serious guy. But you know where Grandpa was the happiest, where he really was himself and really enjoyed things the most, was when he was out in the woods or in a boat with you, fishing or hunting.
He was always, it's you know, there's all sorts of stories about Grandpa, and some, you know, he was a tough guy sometimes, but I will always remember those moments that he just was, you know, taking me to do all these things with him, and you and him and me going places and hunting and fishing. I mean, those are like the foundational experiences of my life.
Yeah, did you ever think you'd be doing this?
No, no, but it's you know, all those things made me who I am today, which have made just led me to have the opportunities I've had.
Have you ever told the story about sitting in your dorm/apartment near Columbia University in Manhattan and interning at Furter Hillyard and bored and out of your tears and deciding to start up Wired to Hunt?
Yes, I have told that story. So people are probably sick of that story. I won't regale that one again. But yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of interesting things that have led us here now, which is pretty cool. And it all started here.
Yep, it did.
This little cabin.
Yeah.
With that's largely just about the dang same as it was when I was here at 3 years old.
Yeah.
I mean, the same pictures on the wall, the same deer on the wall.
Yep. There's
Still no electricity. There's still no running water. There's still no running toilet. The woman folks still don't want to come up here.
First thing that happens when I get home is your mother says, "Strip!"
Yeah. Why is that?
Which normally I'd be excited about, but unfortunately in this case,
It's not for any good reasons.
I'm sorry, this is a family show.
It's not because they're trying to make kid number 3.
If we're going down that road, Mark and I could keep this podcast going for a while.
Yeah. If we want to tell the embarrassing stories about that.
Oh man.
Yeah, there's all sorts of embarrassing stories that we won't tell about you, Dad. But we will say that the cabin does have a little bit of a unique odor to it, supposedly.
Yeah,
that
by
all
the woman folk.
That all of our
The woman
wives
folk.
claim that when we come back, we have a smell of Ken Roven to us. And so, yeah, Mom always makes you take all of your clothes off in the garage. And then my wife now does the same thing. I have to keep all my stuff in the mudroom.
It's a mixture of the fire and those middle of the night buck grunts that go on in the cabin.
You know what's the worst, Josh, is when you're laying on the couch,
then
the elder statesman of the cabin comes walking by, and then happens to pause for a moment right in front of your face, and then there's a buck grunt mysteriously, and then you feel the hair on the side of your head just kind of shifts to one other side.
Oh man, that was a bad night.
You know, I'm really glad this podcast is not nationally syndicated.
Those old buck grunts, I'll tell you.
I would have rather gone cold than have the fire get stoked that night.
Yeah, that was one of those nights that the fire wasn't that important. And on that note, I think we will wrap it up my any final thoughts further?
Just thank you guys for allowing me to come up and inviting me to come up every year. This is one of my favorite times of the year is getting to come up here and hang out for a couple of days. It's never long enough, but it's always a great time when we get up here, and man, it's just I can't thank you guys enough for
You're part of the family,
including me
Josh.
in this. This is a lot of fun, so thank you.
And Deb, any final thoughts?
Well, just thanks for the opportunity. It's nice to listen and hear all your podcasts and hear your all the questions that your audience asks, and to have a little opportunity to just play a little part of that's cool.
It is cool. It's fun to have you on the show. It's fun to also be able to be here and do all the things. And I suppose, on the topic of thanks, I should thank you, Father, for having done such a great job introducing me to hunting and fishing in the outdoors and all these things that have become the foundational element of my life. So thanks for that. Thank you, Grandpa. Thank you, Ken Roven. And thank you, everyone, for listening to us share these stories of deer camp. And with that, we'll shut this one down. So thank you for joining us, especially on this holiday week. Hope you had a great time with friends and family over the Thanksgiving break, and maybe you got to hit the tree stand or the ground blind as well. So I will just give you a couple quick reminders. Number one, the Wired to Hunt merchandise. We've got hats and t-shirts. Those are available, again, over at themeateater.com. If you go to our shop, you'll find all that stuff in there. Speaking of things in the shop, Steve Vernella's new cookbook is available that Steve and Giannis and the whole team worked on. It's the new hunting and fishing cookbook full of recipes for everything from deer, elk, alligator, squirrels, salmon, all sorts of stuff. It's really an incredible book. Would highly recommend you check it out. Last I saw, it was number 4 of all books on Amazon, which is pretty incredible. So head on over to Amazon or Barnes & Noble or wherever you pick up books and check that out. And with that last plug out of the way, I will let you all go. Enjoy the rest of your holidays. Best of luck in the woods. And until next time, stay wired to hunt.
I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. You ever get that feeling the walls closing in, the concrete jungle suffocating you? You crave some wide open spaces, the chance to connect with nature, maybe in a spot all your own. Well, head over to land.com. They've got ranches, forests, mountains, streams, you name it. Search by acreage. You can search by location. You can search by the kind of hunting and fishing you're dreaming of. Land.com. It is where the adventure begins.